All right, welcome everybody to our postcard writing rally. I'm so excited to see so many people on the rally call with us this evening. We're going to give it just a minute or two as additional people are trickling in, but it's great. So many people are already in the chat sharing where they're from, what group they're with, how the No Kings protest went on Saturday. So keep that up. This is a YouTube live, so feel free to use that chat all through the meeting. As always, please be respectful, and we will, do our best to read through the chat. But the goal of this evening is to really talk about all of our postcard writing programs and to share a little bit about our other programs at Progressive Turnout Project, including a volunteer opportunity if you live in California, Georgia, Maine, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, or Virginia ahead of the elections on November 4th. We're also going to talk about our upcoming postcard programs that we're going to start as early as middle of November. So we're so excited that you are here with us this evening. We'll go ahead and get started. So I'll introduce myself. I am Reed McCollum. I am the Program Outreach Director at Progressive Turnout Project. I'm also the founder of Progressive Turnout Project. I grew up in the mountains of North Carolina in Asheville. I currently live in the suburbs outside of Chicago with my wife and my two daughters. In addition to Progressive Turnout Project and Postcards, I also, about 11 months ago, became chair of the Democratic Party of DuPage County, which is Illinois' second largest county. So that has been another way that I can prioritize fighting to save democracy with you all. So I am excited to have a co-pilot here, just a fantastic organizer that many of you are probably going to recognize from her time before she was at Progressive Turnout Project. I'm going to turn it over to Marisa.
Hey everyone, thanks Reed. So lovely to be joining you on this call. My name is Marisa Canoff, she, her, hers, calling in from Arlington, Virginia. I'm a native New Yorker who grew up in Tucson, Arizona. I've been doing the campaign thing for like 13 years or something like that. I started on Barack Obama's reelect in 2012 in Springfield, Ohio. I also worked for Hillary Clinton's campaign in Michigan. If you recognize me on this call, it's probably from the 3 years that I spent at Swing Left, where I was the GOTV director for the 2018 Blue Wave. And I'm coming to Progressive Turnout Project, where I'm the national GOTV director for the cycle, after having spent 5 years at VoteRev and VoteRev Action Fund. And that picture, you're seeing my little pug, Abzug, named for Bella Abzug, outside of the Women's Suffrage Monument in front of the Virginia State House. So our agenda for this evening, we're going to talk a little bit about Progressive Turnout Project, the broad overview. We're going to deep dive into our postcard program, talk about how they work and the data behind them. We'll recap our 2025 programs, talk about our 2026 programs, and then talk about our volunteer door knocking opportunity if you live in one of the 6 states that Reed mentioned earlier. So Progressive Turnout Project, our mission is pretty awesome and pretty simple. We rally Democrats to vote. We're focused on mobilizing the Democratic Party to defend democracy. And, one thing that's unique about us is we solely focus on turnout, making sure that every single Democrat is motivated to exercise their right to cast a ballot. And the other cool thing about us, and that makes us a little bit unique about some of the other organizations, is we spend a lot of our money on what's called field. So contacting voters and, using other people to contact voters, right? We're not paying a whole bunch of money to consultants. We're not, buying up a lot of TV ads. In the presidential cycle last year, we spent more than $52.9 million specifically to contact and turn out and talk to Democratic voters. And as you can see, over 23 and 24, we reached almost 64 million of them, which is just phenomenal. We do this through a variety of programs within the Progressive Turnout Project umbrella. The first is our distributed organizing program, really focusing on rural communities and ex-urban communities. Those are those places where campaigns just aren't nearly as focused. Campaigns will always kind of set up shop in the large urban areas, which are important, absolutely, but we're making sure that we're talking to everybody. In 2022, I think 90% of the voters that we talked to weren't reached by traditional campaigns because of where we were knocking, and in 2024 that number was 65%. So really making a difference and making sure every single Democrat is encouraged to vote. Another way we do this is through our Campaign Fellows program. So this is a really cool program where we advises on hundreds of federal and state campaigns, and they're focused on having conversations on behalf of the candidate. So this is really cool because we're able to fund these fellows to do work for the campaigns while at the same time teaching them a lot of campaign skills and kind of longer term organizing skills that the campaigns might just not have the bandwidth for. Progressive Turnout Project is super excited to have Shape Up the Vote in the family. Shape Up the Vote is this awesome initiative where we work with barbershop owners and hairstylist salon owners in key communities and arm them with resources and talking points about voter registration and encouraging their clients to vote. So this is a great example of really meeting people where they are in their everyday lives and making sure that they still have opportunities to talk about civic engagement. And then have our Democracy First initiative, which identifies politicians across states who threaten the voting process at the local level, and then we run voter turnout programs to defeat them. This is really key because so much of the election minutia and what is or isn't going to be a barrier to voting really happens at these hyper local levels, and we're just making sure that every single race is prioritized and that Democrats have a fighting chance in even the smallest races that matter. So our 2025 year in review. Judge Susan Crawford won the Wisconsin Supreme Court race by 10 points. We invested $1.1 million in door knocking and volunteers. I'm sure many of you on this call wrote more than 1.1 million postcards. Please give yourself a huge round of applause. We helped with special elections in Pennsylvania, in Virginia, in Maine, and Minnesota. We have 30 campaign fellows on 20 Battleground Virginia House campaigns. They're on pace to knock more than 35,000 doors by Election Day. This is really key where the Virginia House is really on a razor's edge there between the Democrats and the Republicans. And our Democracy First program is investing more than $1 million across 3 counties in Pennsylvania, Luzerne, Northampton, and Lehigh, this fall to support pro-democracy candidates. So no such thing as an off year. We're doing really cool work. And of course, we couldn't do it without a lot of the work that y'all are doing. And with that, I believe I'm going to kick it back over to Reed.
All right, thanks, Marisa. Marisa will be back towards the end of the webinar to talk about a volunteer door knocking program in the 6 states. But I'm going to talk about our Postcards program. And I did forget to mention at the beginning of the webinar that because this is on YouTube Live, it is being recorded. It will live on our YouTube channel. So if you aren't able to watch the whole webinar, or if you would like to share this with other folks, the same link that you have right now you click to join will be how you can see this recording ever after. So first of all, just if you haven't written postcards with us, I want to kind of go over the basics. First of all, we have had volunteers, many of you write since 2020 now, 95 million postcards. So we're closing in on that 100 million postcard mark, which is just incredible. That's more handwritten messages to voters than any other organization, in part because we're the only organization that provides millions of postcards for free. So it is not free to provide postage stamps, and that's what you all have to do in addition to writing the message in general. So it's the least that we can do to make sure that we provide free postcards along with printed voter lists and instructions that tell you what message options you have and when to mail the postcards, so that you don't need a printer at home or envelopes or anything like that, just to buy some postcard stamps and get some friends together and write postcards. So I always like to sort of emphasize the fact that we are we're not in the dark in terms of what is effective in terms of direct voter contact. There are almost 20 years now of really scientific research that goes into especially our focus, which is voter mobilization. So organizations like the Analyst Institute are collaboratives where organizations that are data-driven like us publish research. There is a growing and robust research community in the political space on the left, and Democratic and progressive groups that shares a lot of research, whether the findings are null or exciting, so that we can learn from each other. So we are very, very much part of that group. And then there are some public opportunities to get a sense of what's effective. So for example, this book, I always talk about it, Get Out the Vote. It's on its 5th edition. Is really sort of a great meta-analysis of sort of public studies. Not everything is public. Talk about, excuse me, handwritten postcards generate an average of 1 vote every 71 postcards, about 3 times as effective as conventional nonpartisan GOTV mail. So that's really the broad 10,000 foot view of sort of what we know, not just about postcards, but about door knocking, messaging, along with hundreds of organizations that have done thousands of randomized controlled experiments going back to, around 2008 or earlier. As Progressive Turnout Project with Postcards, we've tested now over 15 messages and huge randomized controlled experiments to prove that postcards are effective and to get a really good sense as to which messages are best for handwritten postcards. So we aren't guessing. We take the best practices from now decades of other research, and we apply that, but we also refine it. It's a constant process of testing, measuring, tweaking, and refining. So we've had programs that have boosted turnout by up to 1.3 percentage points, which might seem small, but that is actually pretty enormous. So if you put that in the context of last year's presidential election, when we had volunteers write 40 million postcards, that would add about 229,000 votes. Wasn't enough to get Kamala Harris elected, but it was definitely crucial to preventing Republicans from winning the key Senate races that we held on to in House districts across the country, many down ballot races, North Carolina State Supreme Court race, state house races in places like Wisconsin, just crucial races up and down the ballot. That vote differential is actually almost exactly what Harris fell short by in the Midwest states of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. So another postcard program just like ours might have been enough to sort of close that gap. We've won multiple awards from places like the Analyst Institute for sharing our research, partnered with messaging experts like Anat Shanker-Osorio and Antonia Scatton most recently, who have fantastic substacks on political messaging. We're the only organization that publishes RCTs with postcards that include millions of voters. So just the most enormous experiments. If you've written letters with Vote Forward, which is part of Swing Left, they are extremely data driven. There's a few others, but it is really good to sort of make sure that your volunteer time is spent with organizations that are following best practices. And the best way to know that they're doing that is if they publish research and sort of talk about that side of things in webinars like this for full transparency. So because, as Marisa said, PTP focuses on mobilization, I want to share out just some of the really known best practices around mobilization. So because we get a lot of folks that sort of question, like, why aren't we using more sort of really partisan messages or making sure that the voter understands like what's at stake and how dangerous Donald Trump is? And it is very human nature to think that that is the best message for what we're doing. It turns out, and we know this from research, even very recent research, this is like, the other thing is like everything changed at the beginning of 2025 when Trump was sworn in. And like, it turns out that the human nature has not changed. The fundamentals have been tested recently as the 2024 election. So all of this has been confirmed even within the last year. So messages that focus on voting are more effective than those that focus on candidates, party, or issues for mobilization. And social pressure, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, is the most effective framework to boost turnout. It's reinforcing that voting is a social norm, gratitude, accountability, even like the concept of surveillance, like you're tapping into this literally like tribal psychology that we have going back millions of years, which is that we want as humans, as a social species, to do what is good and what is expected of us. So that's what's going on with some of our messages, is to really make sure that people are thinking about the fact that the election is coming up, thinking about and visualizing voting, and then understanding that like it's the good behavior for somebody who wants to be civically engaged to vote. Messages that are overtly partisan can actually backfire, because a lot of folks, they're just overwhelmed. They hear that Donald Trump is a threat all the time. That's not really new information, and it can cause people just to continue to check out and not really think about the empowering act that is voting, and having that that positive sort of activity if they're just sort of cowering in fear about how dangerous everything is. So it's very different than what motivates a lot of us, and that's good to keep in mind, is that somebody that's going to go vote just because they got a postcard is an alien species to you. And so that's why we rely on the data. And then the other thing that's important to understand is that this is not a persuasion program. So our focus is sending postcards to people that we know, if they vote, are extremely likely to vote for Democrats. So it's not sort of trying to do two things at the same time. It's purely focused on mobilization. All right, let me go forward. So these are the messages. If you've written with us either in 2022 or last year or this year, these look familiar. Every set of instructions gives you these three options. Our most recent experiment testing these specific messages in an enormous program was in the midterms in 2022. That data is on our website in terms of, you can read all of the results in our randomized controlled experiment. But long story short is this social pressure message was 50% more effective than the other two. The other two were also effective and generally much more successful than really any of the other messages that we've ever tested. So we encourage people to write the social pressure message. All of our messages start with "thank you for being a voter," which is a form of social pressure. These all are tried and true frameworks for mobilization that are not just done by Progressive Turnout Project, but by it's really all of the leading mobilization organizations that see these kind of approaches and know exactly what these are, and they are what works. So that's sort of the data piece. If you have additional, more detailed questions, you can always go to our FAQ page on our website or email us, and you get replies. So this year we sent, postcards like these are the ones that you guys are most of you are finishing right now for our last mailing date in 2 days on Friday. So if you're writing during this call trying to finish them, that's fantastic. Virginia obviously has a gubernatorial race, state legislative and municipal races. New Jersey, the same thing. And then in Pennsylvania, it's a little bit different because this is, there are municipal races, but our major focus is retentions for the state Supreme Court, because there are 3 Democrats that are up for retention. They're not listed as Democrats on the ballot, even though they ran as Democrats. So there are partisan judges, but for retention, Party 80 is not listed. So the messages that you guys are writing take that into account. That's a great way for us to make sure that voters know that these are Democrats running, which is part of those messages. So overall, we're writing 6.9 million postcards, which is fantastic. 2 mailing dates. The first was on October 15th. That coincides with sort of the middle of early and mail voting in all 3 of these states. And then the second one on Friday is designed to arrive fairly close to Election Day for folks that didn't vote earlier by mail, to make sure that they get one more nudge ahead of Election Day or in the final days of early voting, depending on the state. And this is really a proven sort of tactic for maximizing how effective our postcards are. So we get a lot of questions about how, real concern over the mail, and that's completely valid. So we're very aware that the mail can be erratic, and that it can be slow, and that mail can get lost or stuck and kind of disappear. We very, very closely monitor USPS delivery times, which are actually reported very scientifically. We do pad our mailing dates pretty aggressively to account for significant delays. But I want to share some statistics and encourage you, if you haven't already ignored our instructions and you have postcards for the October 24th mailing date, to please wait until Friday. The postcards will be more effective if you stick with our data-driven mailing dates always. Postcards on average across the country take 2.5 business days to deliver. So the other statistics that are relevant here are 87% arrive within 5 business days. 96% of the postcards that you're mailing arrive within 6 business days. And our October 24th date is something like 10 business days before Election Day. So you're like, well, what about those 4% that take longer? Because, you know, I sent a postcard to my cousin Susie and she got it like 40 days later. So it is true that like a small single digit number of percentage of postcards, if we stick to our date, may not arrive until after Election Day. But the point is that if we were to move up our mailing dates even more, the overall program would become dramatically less effective. And that's because if these postcards arrive fairly close to Election Day, they will have an impact. Every day they arrive earlier don't think of it as like, well, that's one more day that they're thinking about. It's like they get the postcard, they look at it, generally it goes into the recycling, and they're like, oh, I do need to vote. That's coming up on Tuesday next week. So if you send it too early, it's generally wasted because it'll arrive fairly close to the first one. So please trust us on this, and this is the data to back it up. We measure the effect of, like, you know, how long these postcards are taking, and it's not about guaranteeing that like 0 postcards arrive late. It's about making sure that the overwhelming majority of them arrive close to when we want them to. We've already shifted that earlier than I would like. So to be honest, our mailing dates are earlier than I would consider optimal to make sure that we are not causing mass panic and then having, if there were larger disruptions, you know, the nightmare scenario. So please be aware of that. We also have on our YouTube channel a good 10-minute mailing date explainer that I did last year, which is our most popular video of all time. It's fairly short and it's all about mailing dates. So okay, the other program that so many of you are helping with or have helped with, which is really exciting program, is called News Boosting. So for News Boosting, we've been sending 10 postcards over the year, starting with a mailing date in July, to potential voters in Virginia that share useful news headlines paired with handwritten messages. So there are 2 goals for this program. This program is designed to boost turnout, but it is also focused on persuasion, which is something new for Progressive Turnout Project, following best practices to boost overall turnout. We're measuring the effectiveness of both the impact on boosting turnout and persuasion in an enormous randomized controlled experiment. And so we're excited to get those results sometime in the early spring or hopefully before the summer of next year, and we'll share those. So this approach is really designed to combat right-wing disinformation. You know, we think about like how fragmented media is and how many people get all of their news from like propaganda or TikTok, and the fact that people don't just watch the nightly news. So there are events happening that people have no idea that they're happening, or if their rural hospital closes in Virginia, they may blame Democrats, even though it is absolutely because of Republicans' policies. So our approach is to send actual news headlines to the right group of voters, and have that come across as sort of objective, factual information rather than our own partisan propaganda, even if ours is true. So these are just 5 of the actual postcards. So these will look familiar to some of you. We've sent 10, so there's still 2. You know, you might have an October 23rd or an October 24th mailing date. The majority of them talk about some of the horrible policies that Republicans have put through this year and the harm that they're going to cause to actual real life people. There's a few of them, I think 3 out of the 10, talk about Abigail Spanberger's positive agenda to lower energy costs in Virginia or to deal with healthcare affordability. So it's a little bit of a mix, but this program is really designed to sort of like break through all the disinformation and to, from a somewhat objective source, communicate actual information about the harm of Republican policies. So this is one example of a card, and then we are sending these through our Informed Voters brand, which has a website that highlights the fact that this is accurate news, not partisan propaganda. All of our headlines and the articles are on the website, so voters can go look those up. The messenger matters is a really important sort of concept in persuasion. Is if they don't trust the person who's sharing the message, then it doesn't matter what you're saying. And so in terms of that for persuasion, rather than coming across as just like super strong Democrats, like we're really framing this as like accurate news headlines is our goal to inform voters. And that's why we go with news headlines rather than just like writing our favorite persuasion messages, which is sort of the typical approach of most persuasion. So there have been news boosting research programs before. They've, I believe, all been digital, where on social media you're sharing favorable news headlines, whereas this is the first, to my knowledge, news boosting program through any kind of mail, let alone handwritten postcards. So the handwritten messages that folks have been writing, we actually are testing two different message frameworks. One is a generic message that really talks about just the fact that Informed Voters of VA is an objective organization sharing accurate news headlines with like real people. The other has messages that are really tied to the headline to really sort of reinforce that. So in this case, it's great to see someone proposing real solutions to the affordability crisis. We have the power to bring down costs for working families. So you're like, well, that doesn't say much. What's that doing? It's really modeling the emotion and the reaction. And sometimes there's a call to action. More often, it's about modeling that emotion that we want the voter to experience, and just reinforcing the empowerment of what our vote can deliver. So a little bit more on this approach is it's not something that we created in a vacuum. It's partly a reaction to sort of news consumption trends that I mentioned, that information is so fragmented that just sharing real actual news can have an impact. But this was inspired by the late Hal Malchow's research, including the idea, sort of, established basics about like what is persuasive. So important principle in persuasion advertising is that it's new information that persuades voters. So when you think about what you sometimes would love to write on a postcard, if it's just sort of like, this is how much this thing matters, like if that's not something that's new, like they know there are Democrats that feel really strongly about like the threat of Donald Trump. That will not be new information. So especially if you are not somebody that they know, you're not an objective messenger, that is why those kind of just like really hard hitting messages would just do nothing. Whereas so you need new information. So that's why, the headlines and the articles, like there's only so much you can put on a postcard, but by sending 10 of them and having them be from objective sources, the idea is that'll break through for some folks. And we'll know because we're measuring it. Okay, we are doing a new news boosting program starting in the middle of November. I'm really excited about this because we have never at Progressive Turnout Project for Postcards to Swing States had a program that starts within a couple of weeks of an election day, but we're going to get a very, very early jump on the 2026 key Senate states by starting with news boosting. So we're going to be sending 5 news boosting postcards between early February and the end of April. Those are going to be going to folks that live in states that have key Senate races in 2026. If there's enough volunteer interest, we could send far more than that, but that's our initial plan. So the more news boosting postcards that folks write, the more we can fight disinformation in states that have key Senate races next year. And we're going to be able to start offering those free postcards for these news headlines as early as mid-November. So our goal is to make sure persuadable and disengaged voters understand how Republican policies hurt their communities and to show how Democrats are fighting for issues that matter to them. So we don't have a propaganda news empire. We need all of you to help deliver real life, actual news to key voters in these states. What are the states? So Georgia, Iowa, Maine, Michigan, and North Carolina. These are not all of the states where we'll be doing postcards in 2026. I'll share all of the states shortly, but these are the ones that we're targeting for our news boosting program. So we'll be sending 5 postcards between February and late April. So if you sign up in November, you have all the way until April. I'm sorry, you have all the way until like early February. So don't worry if you're busy over the back half of November or in the month of December, as many of us are. You can work on them as you have time over the holidays, and then in the dead of winter, you've got all of January and a little bit of February, even if you have the first mailing. So our Get Out the Vote postcards in 2026, we'll start signups for this program at the beginning of May. So this is when we launch our enormous Get Out the Vote program with the same sort of 3 message options that have come to know. We'll send 2 postcards targeted voters in mid-October and late October. We'll consider adding additional states if they become competitive, but we already have Ohio and Iowa on this map. All of these states are going to be saturated with postcards statewide. And in addition to the statewide postcards, we're going to be sending postcards to all of the competitive US House districts that are not in those states. So everybody that lives in these states right here, whether you're in a competitive district, House district or not, all of these voters are going to be receiving postcards. So it's only competitive House districts in other states that will be adding through to our House program. So we estimate that that'll be about 36 House districts, which is only a subset again of the total map. And then we may even do postcards to some of the competitive state legislative races where something like a control of a chamber or a supermajority is at stake. And that can be really surprising in terms of the states where some of those things are in play. So overall, for the entire cycle of 2025 and 2026, our goal is to write 35.3 million postcards. We need your help for that. We're absolutely committed to continuing to measure what's effective, but we know that our postcard program adds tens of thousands of votes and does actually make the difference in many, many important races. So feel good about your activism. Bring more friends to help. Keep writing those postcards. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Marisa to talk about a volunteer door knocking opportunity that we have.
Awesome. Thanks, Reed. And yes, please write all of the postcards. The postcards are super awesome and super effective. But I'm here to talk to you about our fall 2024 volunteer door knocking program, which we are calling Neighbors Knocking for Democracy. So Neighbors Knocking for Democracy, as Reed mentioned earlier, is happening in 6 states: California, Georgia, Maine, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Virginia. And the program has 2 goals. Number 1, we want to turn out Democrats to vote in these 6 states because all of them have key statewide elections. And number 2, Progressive Turnout Project has invested in a new canvassing tool called Touchstone that is going to be used to drive a lot of the work in 2026. And we want to use this fall to kind of stress test the tool and make sure that it's ready for those large programs during the midterms next year. Why do we knock on doors? Studies show that every conversation makes somebody 7% more likely to vote. As I mentioned earlier, and as Reed's been talking about, we do mobilization, we do turnout, and we reach voters that other campaigns are just not reaching. So in 2022, that was 90% of the doors we knocked weren't reached by another campaign. In 2024, that was 65%. Many of these elections that we're knocking in are very low salience, right? This isn't a presidential election year where everybody knows there's an election happening. We're not going to see the saturation that we saw with the presidential year. It's part of the reason why the postcards you guys have been writing are so important. In many cases, voters might not even know that they have an election to vote in. And part of the reason we wanted to talk to y'all about it is because this is a good thing to do if you still want to squeeze out that last bit of activism for the cycle once the postcard send deadline has passed and you can't write or send any more postcards for the election deadlines this fall. So as I mentioned, we're knocking in 6 states. In California and Maine, we have our ballot propositions. I think folks are probably pretty familiar with the California ballot proposition. This is Yes on 50. This is Governor Newsom's, direct counterattack to Trump telling the Texas legislature to rig maps in favor of Republicans. I'm sure folks saw the headline recently that the North Carolina legislature just rushed through this brand new map, giving an edge on federal House seats to Republicans there. Therefore, it is more crucial than ever that this ballot measure passes so that Democrats can gain an advantage in California, and that we have right now the Republicans only control the House by like 3 seats. If we can kind of guarantee even 2 or 3 safe Dem seats, we're going a long way to making sure that we take back the House in 2026. Folks might be less familiar with the ballot proposition in Maine. Basically, it's we want people to vote no on 1 in Maine. 1 is a ballot proposition funded by a far-right super PAC that would greatly curtail the ability of Mainers to vote absentee, and it would also mandate a photo ID requirement. It's voter suppression, pure and simple. All the evidence in Maine shows that their elections are safe and fair and secure. All this does is make it harder to people to vote. And in a state where 40% of the voters vote by mail, things that will make absentee voting harder are just going to reduce voter turnout. So yes on 50 in California, no on 1 in Maine. We have probably the most well-known races on this list, the gubernatorial races in Jersey and Virginia. We have Mikey Sherrill, an amazing candidate on the Democratic top of the ticket for New Jersey. We have Abigail Spanberger, another amazing candidate in Virginia. If elected, Abigail Spanberger would be the first ever woman governor of Virginia. Granted, her opponent in the race is also a woman, but let's make it so the first woman governor is a Democrat, not a Republican. And then in Pennsylvania and Georgia, we have kind of what I'm calling our statewide candidate elections. So Reed already mentioned the Pennsylvania one. I'll start there. Again, we have these Democratic justices on the state Supreme Court, Christine Donahue, Kevin Doherty, and David Wecht. They're up for what's called a retention election, which is basically, do Pennsylvanians want to vote to retain these 3 justices to serve another term? Yes or no? As Reed mentioned, they're not going to be seeing like Christine Democrat, D on the ballot. Like the ballot question is, do you want to vote to retain? Yes or no? It's really important that people are voting yes to retain. And then probably like the wonkiest race on this list is the Georgia Public Service Commission. So Georgia has a public service commission. It does things like set the utility rates. It is 5 districts. Right now, commissioners in 2 districts, districts 2 and 3, are up for election. It'll be the first time since 2020 that Georgians have had a chance to vote on who serves on this commission. Right now, the commission is all Republicans, and they have presided over 3 straight rate increases. What makes this a little wonky is even though only districts 2 and 3 have an election, any Georgian anywhere in the state, regardless of if they live in these districts, can vote in this race, and you can vote for both of them. So, a bit more of a under the radar race, but still a really crucial election to get Democrats out to vote in. And of course, who are we talking to? We are talking to likely Democrats, because that is who we like to turn out, particularly these high potential Democrat voters who need that extra nudge to cast a ballot. We've done this we've created our universe in 2 ways. Number 1, in states that have party registration, we've just kicked registered Republicans off the list. And we've even gone so far as to remove what we call activatable Republicans, any household with an activatable Republican. So, if Reed and I are roommates and I'm a Democrat and he's a Republican, and we think that by talking to me, we're going to encourage him to vote because he sees me talking to somebody, we've just flat out removed those houses from the list. And then in states without party registration, we've used a model to identify highly partisan targets. I will say I've been out in my neighborhood in Virginia, a couple times over the past few weeks just to do some canvassing myself and test out our new tool. And the universe is very, very good. I've only had conversations with Democrats. A lot of people are even happy to see me at the door. I suspect it's because I like to knock in one of my Ruth Bader Ginsburg t-shirts. But the point is, these should be friendly conversations. We're not doing any of that persuasion. It's turnout time. We're just trying to get Democrats to cast a ballot. And then the other part of our program is to test out this new tool that we have invested in called Touchstone. So the reason that we have invested in Touchstone, Reed, if you want to go to the next slide there, is I don't know if folks read the New York Times, subscribe to the New York Times. Totally okay if you don't, obviously. Folks on this call have probably used a tool to canvass before called Minivan, with the exception of the state of California, which uses a tool called PDI. Almost every single Democratic campaign up and down the ballot, federally, the DNC, right, they use Van to talk to and turn out voters. And Van is fine as a tool. It's not fine that it has a monopoly on Democratic voter contact. I don't know if folks saw this article when it came out at the beginning of this March, but in the past few years, Van was sold to a private equity firm, not even in America. I believe it's headquartered in the United Kingdom, that, as a private equity company, its goal is profit, profit, profit. So it has been conducting layoffs to the Van section in recent years, just purely from a profit margin perspective. And it's not great that this kind of foreign-owned for-profit company owns the crux of the Democratic data turnout CRM. Touchstone is a way to give Democrats more options and hopefully to never need an intervention again, like the kind that happened last November, to just keep Van up and running for candidates across the country for Democrats. So we're excited about Touchstone for a variety of reasons. Number one, and the thing that I like the most, is if folks have ever knocked doors with Minivan or PDI, you've probably had to download something to your phone. It's like yet another app, and it maybe takes up space that you don't have because you have pictures of your kids or your dogs or your family or whatever. Touchstone is web-based. You simply open your favorite internet browser, the same one that you would use to read the New York Times, for example, unless you're in the app, and you use Touchstone the same way that you would surf the web for anything else. So kind of very seamless process there. We're calling our program Neighbors Knocking for Democracy because you can pick your own turf in your own neighborhood and knock doors wherever you want. When you log into Touchstone and you start door knocking, you can literally enter your zip code and it'll pull up a map with little pins of like every turf in your area, and you just select the one that you want to knock on. So you can literally be talking to your neighbors in your own neighborhood. If you see enough of your neighbors and instead you want to knock across town, maybe next to your favorite coffee shop or something, you can do that too. The cool thing is you have the control about where you want to knock on doors to talk to and turn out voters. And then it's pretty easy to track your progress and the conversations you're having. That's the other thing that we're really excited about. Part of the reason we're asking folks to participate is because we need your feedback. Touchstone is a new tool. We're very excited about it, but now is really our chance to put it through its paces and make it as good as it can possibly be ahead of the 2026 midterms. Tell us what you like, tell us what you don't like. I will say, we still are ironing out the kinks. It's a little buggier than we want it to be right now. It still works. I mean, I've been out on it several times and, I'm still having good conversations with voters. It's just like the user experience is a little like, hey, it would make more sense if after you clicked on this button, it did this thing. So you're not just helping us test out new tech, you're also helping us how we, improve voter turnout for the long haul. Because we know that knocking doors and then filling out a feedback form is an extra ask, we are doing a raffle system where everybody who completes a door shift and fills out a feedback form is entered to win a $50 gift card and a Progressive Turnout Project swag pack with the items you see here. So the PTP water bottle, the PTP Voting Matters mug, and the Excuse Me, I'm Voting sticker. If you'd like to participate, all of our events are up online on Mobilize. They're all kind of under that Neighbors Knocking brand. So if you're in Georgia, Neighbors Knocking for Georgia. If you're in Maine, Neighbors Knocking for Maine, so on and so forth. Folks can pretty much knock doors on their own neighborhood in their own time whenever they want on weekends. On Tuesday, October 28th, which is National Vote Early Day, and of course on Election Day, November 4th. Our trainings are also up online. The Canvas training is simply called Neighbors Knocking for Democracy Canvas training. It's virtual. You can join from anywhere. Our next training is actually this Thursday, but we have trainings throughout the weekends and on Thursdays and on Mondays. And if you sign up to knock with us, you'll get everything you need to be able to do this on your own. Well, after you attend the Canvas training, or even before, if you don't want to attend our Canvas training, we can send you a script and our, how to knock doors best practices guide, our tips and tricks for how to knock doors, our Touchstone guide that includes a screenshot like screenshot kind of step-by-step how to use the tool, lit that you can print in your own neighborhood that's been optimized for black and white printing. We'll make sure you have everything that you need to be successful there. I will flag that the way that Mobilize works is you have to pick some location in the state when you're having a statewide event. So for example, if you click on the Georgia event, it'll say that the location is Atlanta. You might be like, but I don't live in Atlanta, what do I do? Like, that's totally fine. You can still knock wherever you want in your own neighborhood. It's just that to make the event statewide, you have to pick a dummy location. So don't be alarmed if you click on one of these Canvas events and it says that it's a location that you're not in. The true location is actually your neighborhood where you want to knock on doors. Reed, back to you.
Yeah, well, we're gonna drop into the live chat. I think Sue is on the team, gonna drop that in. So if you want to sign up for one of the trainings for the neighbors knocking, you'll be able to do that. I was kind of reading through the chat. If people do have questions, we'll try to answer a few questions live. So if you kind of, throw some questions in the chat, we're going to spend just a few minutes trying to take some live questions. I did spot a couple. The one on neighbors knocking, Marisa, is about whether people volunteering are, whether they should have a badge or some kind of identification. Is there anything that we provide? And I know this gets covered in the training, but if you just kind of give the short answer to that.
The short answer is you don't need a badge or anything like that. Just go out in what you feel the most comfortable in.
Cool. And then there were a few postcard questions that I'll answer because I saw those in the chat already. A lot of folks were asking whether we would do a postcard program for the spring state Supreme Court election in Wisconsin. And that is a great question. We did postcards for the Supreme Court race in Wisconsin this year. It's not currently a plan for us to do that next year. But I will all but guarantee that there will be a postcard program out there by some good organization. I know like Activate America has often done postcards for Supreme Court races in Wisconsin. If not them, then there will hopefully or certainly be an organization that does. We're going to kind of focus on, we plan to focus on the news boosting to fill that sort of time frame, and then we launch our Get Out the Vote program pretty early at the beginning of May. So that could change, like specifically if we learn that there isn't an organization that is planning to do postcards, we would very strongly consider filling that hole. But the good thing about there being other organizations that do postcards that we're good partners with is that as long as there are good postcard writing opportunities for that Wisconsin race, we have that covered. I also saw folks in Florida and Texas that have important Senate races. We very, very much will keep an eye on those races and consider if there's enough demand from volunteers to fulfill our goals. We'll consider for sure adding those races because we definitely want to support those for sure. And then a couple people mentioned in the chat Tennessee. So I will say that we are going to do a postcard program for the Tennessee 7th Congressional District Special Election on December 2nd. Most of you will not hear about that other than on this call because it is fairly small. A single congressional district is about 150,000 postcards. So we plan to send an email out once we're ready to launch signups for that to people that live in Tennessee and then to volunteers in neighboring states that don't have elections on November 4th this year. So if you live in or near Tennessee and don't have elections this fall, you might be getting an email asking if you want to sign up to help us write those postcards. Like one way or other, we will make sure that we send 2 postcards on behalf of the Democratic candidate. That is a special election that I think is winnable. It's definitely an uphill battle, but that district includes a good chunk of Nashville and all of Clarksville, and would be great to have huge momentum with just a dramatic upset victory for Democrats heading into next year there. So we will just briefly look at the chat, looking down at my iPad with YouTube there to see the chat and see if we've got any other questions before we wrap up. But if we didn't answer any of your questions in this website Well, actually, the postcards at turnoutpack.org is our email address. If it's a question about door knocking, you can still send it there and we will get that to Marisa. Otherwise, we will respond to your question. Yeah, so somebody in the chat is asking if it's okay to mail postcards in a rubber band rather than loose. That is absolutely fine. Whatever is the easiest way to do that. We used to say not to rubber band them, and they don't need to be sorted, but it's fine if they're in rubber bands. Whatever's easier for you, or will fit through the slot, or to hand them, especially to a post office worker. That's something that we no longer include. Is it's totally okay to put them in rubber bands. Some folks are asking about independent voters, like what do we do with independent voters? So some people that are registered independent or are unaffiliated are absolutely people that get postcards. I think it's especially if they're more likely than not to vote for Democrats. So there's some modeling that we use that predicts how likely people are to support Democrats. It's not just registered Democrats, whether or not you live in a state that has even party registration. It's much more about sort of, things like age, race, gender, like where do they live, like how democratic or Republican is their precinct normally. Bunch of factors that go into sort of predicting how likely somebody is to support a Democrat. So just because they're an independent doesn't mean they don't get our postcards. It's not all independents, especially for a mobilization program. For our news boosting program, there are far more independent voters that are included in that. We definitely exclude, all the strong Republicans or people that are very likely to be huge fans of Donald Trump, because we don't want to remind them how big of a fan they are of what Trump is doing, which, but yeah, let's see what else. Okay. All right. Well, this is great. We really appreciate all of you for being here tonight. If you've been writing your postcards and you have a lot to finish, please do your best. Mail all of them on Friday, the 24th, if that's your mailing date. And if you can't get them all done by then, it's still okay to mail them a few days later. They will get there in time. And really appreciate all of your incredible activism. If you've been out there for No Kings, keep doing the protests. It is tremendously important as well. We both have to, stand up and fight back against tyranny by making sure that other citizens see people that are modeling the behavior of not just letting tyranny roll us over and not being afraid to go out there and demonstrate. And then we also have to win elections to make sure that we have leaders in power who can investigate and then ultimately replace Republicans. And I'm optimistic always about our prospects, and I'm so grateful because of all of the work of the hundreds of thousands of volunteers that we've got and the thousands of you that were on this call this evening. So everybody have a blessed evening, and thank you so much for everything that you do. And thanks for Marisa for joining to talk about the great door knocking program. Good night, everybody.